Hello, this is Unexplained America, and I'm your host, Lisa. Thank you for joining me this week. If you're a regular to my show, please note that A. Pipkin's case, the part 2, is coming. I am just waiting for some information, just a document that I'm trying to get that has probably been destroyed, but I'm really going to try to get it before I issue out that episode. So, anyway, so stay tuned. It will come out the following week behind this episode. A little business before we get started. Please leave a comment, leave me a rating, let me know if there's any content you want to hear, and go follow me on my Facebook business page. Now, we're going to get started with this week's episode. And what we are talking about is the University of Arkansas's ghostly legends. Ghostly apparitions, lights that flicker on and off, footsteps in an empty building. All of these occurrences are on a campus incorporated with approximately 34,000 students. All of this happening on the University of Arkansas Fayetteville campus. First, like I want to do, we're going to discuss the actual university. The university is located in the beautiful Boston Mountains in the upper western portion of Arkansas and in the beautiful town of Fayetteville. Now, most of you are maybe familiar more with the word the Ozarks. The Boston Mountains do make up the Ozarks, and the Ozarks actually are in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Missouri. In 1862, Congress, they passed the Morrill Act. I don't know if it's Morrill. They passed this act, and this was actually signed by your OG President Abraham Lincoln. So it was during his time and during his presidency. What this act provided, it gave the states like federal land grants, and it was specifically to push the states to have a university level learning for agriculture, industry, engineering, that kind of thing. It really wanted to promote particularly agriculture. The Arkansas legislature really does not get moving on this until 1868. So, we kind of go through or finish up, I should say, the horribleness of the Civil War and then what they call the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. And so by 1868, Arkansas is back to this. They're like, okay, we really need to do something with this act. Well, finally, in 1871, the Arkansas legislation puts together a board of trustees. And what they're going to be over is this flagship university situation. And they have to figure out what to do, where to do this university very quickly because there is a time crunch on this act. Put it in place in 1862, and they kind of gave the states until 1872. So we're in a time crunch at this point. Now, there were several cities in Arkansas that really wanted this university. They were looking at, or I should say, the cities vying for it was Batesville, Little Rock, Pine Bluff, several other places, and specifically Fayetteville. As it got down to it, the cities that kind of came up as leaders for the university was Batesville and Fayetteville. And both during this time in 1870, just to kind of give you a background, like they were both neck and neck as far as population, okay? Batesville had around 800 and something people. Fayetteville had 900 and something. They were very close. I will say Fayetteville currently is the second largest city in Arkansas, and it is right under Little Rock, like right behind Little Rock. So it is huge. Batesville now has 11,000 people. And so you can see that this situation, not just the university situation, but the Fayetteville area just prospered and grew very quickly because of business and agriculture. And, they had big wealthy families. Of course, Walmart came out of that area. So it's just it has been a booming area. But again, it started at less than 1,000 people at this time. The Board of Trustees votes. Again, they get it down to the two cities, so they're going back and back. Well, They want to go look at these cities. They need to like look at everything about the cities and make their decision. Well, they travel to Batesville in September of 1871, and then they visit Fayetteville. At this time, so this trustee group, they're coming out of Little Rock. These men are coming out of Little Rock. And at that time, to get to Fayetteville, they had to actually train over to Morrilton, and then they had to catch a steamboat up the Arkansas River, and then they had to get on a stagecoach for a final 60 miles through the Boston Mountains. 60 miles of that. I mean, I can't even, in a stagecoach, guys. I don't even know how long that took. So it was quite a venture. I mean, it was trains, steamboat, and then a stagecoach just to get to Fayetteville. Even though this was crazy, the city of Fayetteville had really helped themselves out. They had actually raised a total of $135,000 for the university, because what this act was doing was giving them the land, but they still had to come up with the price to fund the university. And so the city of Fayetteville really wanted this. They came up with the funds to do this. And so lo and behold, the trustees, even though it took them all that time to travel there, they choose Fayetteville to be this university spot. They have to find the land. So there is about 160 acres, and it is owned by a William McElroy at that time. Some of it, it's like 160 acres, a little west of like the downtown area of Fayetteville, and it has like orchard on it. Like not all of it's developed, quote unquote, but it's just a really pretty piece of land, and it's high up on a hill. It does have some buildings. It has the orchard. They purchase this land, and it goes for about $12,000 for all this land. So the land is purchased, and actually the university, and this is purchased in like 1871, okay? And the university's name to start out with is the Arkansas Industrial University, and it officially opens in January of 1872. And they just built like a kind of a two-story frame building to begin with. And they started with 3 faculty members and 7 students. Now, I will say by the end of that first year, they had an enrollment into the hundreds. So it kind of started small, but it really picked up. Now, a lot of these people were just coming from the northwest portion of the state. Again, it was really hard to get there. By 1873, they began the planning phase of what's called the historic Old Main Building. Now, this Old Main Building would be their first permanent building on the campus. And they have to look at plans. So they had actually received a plan looked at a plan, but then they had actually ventured to the University of Illinois campus, and they actually had this beautiful building with 2 towers on each end, and they were like, this building is really beautiful. So they decided to go ahead and ditch these other plans that they had received, build this building right off the plans of the University of Illinois. They like tweaked it a little bit. And they ended up using local contractors for this and local materials, which we'll talk about. They do build this building. It is the largest building in the state at the time that they're building it. And it did take 2.5 million bricks. And they did use sandstone. So basically they had to bring in the materials and actually make the bricks on site. So that's how they were building this building at the time. And it took 134,000 to actually build the building at this time. And this is completed in June of 1875. So this is in the 1870s. We're talking 134,000. I believe the original quote that they were trying to spend was like 123,000, but like all construction jobs, it went over. So I think that's normal, isn't it? Upon the completion of the building, they celebrated with a huge picnic and fireworks, and it was amazing. Now, the building wasn't even actually finished. I mean, they really didn't need the space. And this space was this building is a 4-story building plus a basement, and it was over 100,000 square feet. Again, this was the largest building in Arkansas, and they just didn't need all that space. In fact, the basement wasn't finished. There were upper floors, like the third and fourth floor, weren't actually finished at the time. They had just gotten the building up. They finished the first and second floors, and they were like, this is great. This is what we need. So this building is acting for the university as so many things: lecture halls, dining, just everything's going on in this building at that time. In 1876, the university has their first graduation ceremony. Consists of around 9 graduates. Yay. And again, mainly these kids were from the area, like from Fayetteville itself. Now, in 1879, they do have their first bell actually installed within the bell towers. Again, they have these 2 bell towers. And the bells were to signify the start of classes and important events on campus. Again, from 1875 to for many years, for the next 100 years, Old Main is serving as all kinds of goodness for the college. We're talking just everything. And the bell is dinging for many, many years. But by the 1947, the actual installation of electric bells are installed. And so the bell isn't actually, not to say it's not working, but it's not necessary. They do have electric bells going at this time. And of course, over the years, the building is getting renovated, has repairs. By the 1980s, the building is over 100 years old, and it is in need of just a total renovation. I mean, it's 100 years old. It just needs to be renovated. Now, the school raises the funds needed, and there was about $10 million that needed to be raised, and these funds came from a lot of different places. It came from federal funding and state funding, but they did need to renovate. It is said that after or right before they actually began the renovations, the final time that the bell actually worked, it did a final chime of 10 times, signifying 10 millions that was going to be spent on this huge renovation. Currently, the Old Main is still very much a part of the campus. In fact, it is a fixture, it is a landmark, it's a historic landmark. It's absolutely a beautiful part of the campus. It's right in the center of campus. And currently, the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences utilize Old Main. There are 5 other departments that utilize Old Main, and the Honors College that utilizes Old Main. So I was actually just at Old Main myself for orientation for my daughter, and all of her orientation gatherings happen in Old Main. So it was really, really cool to be inside Old Main. It is just, I can't even describe it. I love old buildings, and it has just the smells of academia, the smell of oldness, of learning, of just all the things. It's just an absolutely beautiful building inside and out. And of course, currently, it is the oldest building on campus. And being old, there have come about reported paranormal activities. After hours, it's said that when you're alone in the building, when you're walking around the building, you can hear heavy, deliberate, unmistakable sounds of footsteps above you. Additionally, what the lore says is that these footsteps are allegedly from faculty or students that have passed away tragically on the campus and are still lingering to this day. In this respect, because of this lore, I did want to look at the history of the campus and look for so-called tragedies with students or faculty to see what I would come up with. And I will say, over the years, there have been numerous tragedies on campus. In 1916, there was a male freshman, and he was sick. He was actually put in the infirmary on campus, and he was in the infirmary for a month before he died. And this happened on campus. of typhoid fever. And so at that time, there weren't tons of buildings. There were Old Main in 1916. They did have several other buildings by this time, but these buildings would have been very close to Old Main. Now, in 1946, I did find an article that mentioned another male student was killed in an auto accident there in Fayetteville. And actually, 3 other students were injured in this accident. 4 in the accident, and then 1 fatality. Now, there are 2 incidents that happened in 1963. One was a 20-year-old student, a male student. He actually committed suicide in his apartment. Now, his apartment was not part of the university, but it was very close. Like, he lived maybe a block from Carnall Hall, okay? Now, another student, he died in a car accident. And again, this happened near Fayetteville on the highway, actually traveling. I think they were coming back at this point from being away for Easter weekend. And there were actually, this was like a huge accident, and there were 6 other students injured in this accident, and then another 2 others that were not students that were injured in this accident. So 8 injured, and then 1 fatality from this horrific accident in 1963. And again, this was in Fayetteville, but this would have been a huge tragedy and a horrendous situation for the campus, as any tragedies are. These young people passing away and just traveling to go home for Easter. Now, in 1964, a 28-year-old male student, he dies in the hospital from an overdose of phenobarbital and asphyxiation. And it's stated that this came from natural gas, and this was from a coroner's report. In 1968, 2 more students passed away. Now, one was in a plane crash. He was actually 21 years old and in the business college, and he was traveling on a plane that was carrying 85 total passengers. So he was one of 85 that actually passed away in this horrible crash. The second student actually passed away in hospital from a gunshot wound to the head. Did not state the circumstances around this situation. It was just like a hunting accident or what happened, but he was only 19 years old. Now, in 1970, there were 2 workers. They are reported injured while working on the university. So they don't pass away, but they are injured. And one is an electrician actually working on a project at the Chi Omega Greek Theater. And then another was a worker that was working on the 5th floor in the Pomfret Hall. And he was actually hit with materials falling down upon him. And this was 1970. And they both lived, but they were very injured. Now, in 1971, there is a female student who is stabbed to death by a young Fayetteville man. In fact, this young man was only 17 years old. He was quickly arrested, and she does live in an apartment off campus, but it was very close to campus. Now, in 2004, there are 3 contracted workers, and they are all killed. They are electrocuted while moving tents on campus. And again, they don't work for the university, but they are working with a company that the university has hired to like move these tents around. And this was located at the site of the Agricultural Research Center on campus. And this is just horrific accident. But all 3 of these men are electrocuted and die on campus. Now, remember this story for later, okay? Now, there is a horrible tragedy on campus, or I should say another horrible tragedy. In 2020, a young female student named Kimberly Stein, she's only 23 years old. She is hit and killed while walking across a crosswalk on campus. In fact, she was right on Maple, and she is killed. They do not file charges against the man that hit her. I do not know the circumstances behind it, but they did not evidently have any findings to arrest him or charge him with manslaughter or anything like that. But this was absolutely devastating and a horrendous situation for the campus. And again, she's passing away right on campus. Now, sadly, in 2025, there are 3 students that fall from balconies located at the Carnall campus apartments. Now, one of those is a 19-year-old male, and he does pass away. The other 2 are injured, but they live through these incidences. So this is right in 2025, guys, that this happened. So some of these are old incidents, but some are very new. And I also express these as a safety concern. Make sure that you practice all safety measurements when you're on any college campus, especially, looking where you walk and making sure that you're not ever close to any type of railing situation. So balconies are scary. There obviously are a lot more instances that weren't publicized, that weren't put in newspapers. These are just what I could find. This also doesn't encompass all the many medical situations that would have happened. This is just some that arise that were actually printed about. There were many faculty and students that had illness, sicknesses, heart attacks, whatever. So there are a lot, in 140 years, there have been a lot of people on campus and a lot of horrific happenings. Additionally, Old Main does have a fire take place in 1966. Now, it's stated that this fire was from a quote unquote hot seat left on in the speech department theater room. Now, no one is actually injured, but this happened. And I would like to know, what is a hot seat? Is that like I'm trying to think. I don't even know it said hot seat in 1966. I don't know what that is. That's very interesting. Let me know if you know. Now, also additionally, in 1973, an FBI informant actually comes forward and states that they were told that there would be bomb threats and a bombing in Old Main. This is all that is said. I don't know where this FBI informant came from, what the circumstances were. Nothing ever happened, but they were on high alert about a possible bomb threat in the building at that time. Other haunted stories of Old Main is the mystery of the bell towers themselves, which we talked about the history there, at what point they were, 1879, the bell was installed. In fact, the bell is still there. It just is not working. And of course, they had electronic bells. They do utilize electronic bells to this day, to my knowledge. And then, of course, the last time it rang in the 1980s, and in fact, that was 1985. Now, it is said now, to this day, whenever the campus is extremely quiet, we're talking really late in an evening or very early morning, 1, 2, 3 a.m., it's said that people will hear the bell ring, the actual bell. And allegedly, the bell is being rung by these past students or professors from the past, or people that have had any type of tragedy on campus. Another strangeness to Old Main is that when students or others walk past the building late at night or even during the day, they'll look up at the building. The building is beautiful, and they'll look into the windows and they will see the shapes of what appears to be humans, okay? Human like shapes standing in the window, like someone is staring out at them. And it always appears that this person or persons is just staring back at you when you see them. Now, when people approach the building to get a closer look, the figures disappear. Now, these figures are thought to be, again, these past students or faculty that are lingering on campus. And it is said that people have experienced being able to take pictures of the building and see figures in the windows. Others experience things on the inside. When they're inside the actual building, in a classroom, in a hallway, they will experiencing hearing doors open and shut. Sometimes doors are slamming shut like really hard and there's nobody in the building. It's either like empty after hours. There's no warning. There's no breeze. There's nothing logical to associate the reason for the door slamming. And additionally, they do find professors or different people, when they have come into the building in the morning, they will find doors that should be locked that are unlocked. And so they're just being able to go into this building that should be locked down. Doors unlocking, locking, slamming doors. A final paranormal tale is of an actual ghostly apparition that floats alongside the actual bell tower. This is said to be inside and outside, to see this ghostly person on both realms, inside and outside of the bell tower. Possibly ringing the bell tower. I don't know. We're just guessing here. Old Main is not the only old building on campus, and it's not the only building to have these quote unquote paranormal stories, activities going on. And I will say earnestly, when I choose a hotel, you guys know me, when I choose a hotel, typically I am trying to look for something really nice or with some sort of history, some sort of story. Is it quote unquote haunted? I just, I want something with a backstory if possible, if we're going to stay in a hotel. Well, when we went to orientation, I booked the inn at Carnall Hall. And I booked this having like zero knowledge at all of the hall, like the inn. I just knew it was nice. I'd seen it when we had, been on campus before. I was like, oh, and it's right on campus. The inn at Carnall Hall is literally across from the sorority houses. It's right by Old Main. Like it is in the heart of campus. And so I really wanted to stay there because of the proximity to campus. Okay. Now, when I booked it, I did look it up. I'm like, okay, I want to look at it. The first things that are popping up is that it's haunted. And I'm like, okay. And then it's also popping up about just the history. And so we'll kind of get into it. But I actually did not stay knowing any of that. And I just happened to like book it. It was a fun little surprise. So I'm going to first talk about the history. Carnall Hall, its inception begins in 1902. Okay, we talked about how the university came about in 1872. That's when it was like first open to students. Well, in 1902, they really needed a dorm for women. And this building is going to cost at this time $45,000 to build. And this building would be constructed as a 3-story, 44-bedroom, huge brick structure. And it was chosen, and right now it is right on, I want to say Maple Street. It's across from the sorority row, like I said. It was chosen at that time because it was the furthest location from the men's dorms. Okay, so the hall, as soon as it was in its inception, probably because it had been in the works, was named after a former student and associate professor named Ella Howson Carnall. They called her Miss Carnall. Now, she actually had entered the university at the age of only 14 in 1875. So she actually was from Fort Smith, and then she went to the university then. She graduates in 1881 and immediately becomes an assistant teacher, right? Like, so working at the university. She was known as diligent, having a high sense of honor. She was strictly attentive to her studies, almost to the point, and I wouldn't say almost, primarily to the point of even making herself sickly. It said that she was just all in when it came to her studies and her diligence and just her focus on the university itself. Now, she teaches, but she's also earning her master's degree. So she earns her master's degree, she's teaching, and then she actually goes and teaches school in Fort Smith for a bit. Then this is where she was raised by an aunt and uncle. She had actually lost her parents at a very young age. But well, after she teaches at the Fort Smith, she does land a job at the University of Michigan. And she actually, while she's there, she is a professor, but she's also attaining another master's degree. And she gets this degree in philosophy, but she's also studying all kinds of languages. She's studying German, Anglo-Saxon, like all these languages. In 1891, before she's even finished with that master's degree at the University of Michigan, the University of Arkansas trustees, and again, they're still the Arkansas Industrial University at this time, okay? But the trustees, they actually get together and they hold a position for her to come teach at the university, and she's going to teach English and modern languages. She is never married, she never has kids. She is just totally and utterly devoted to the university. She is actually quickly brought up and promoted to an associate professor. Okay. Right kind of by this in 1894, she is very sickly and she has kind of been what they called of a delicate nature her whole life. And again, they talked about how delicate she was, how sickly she was, kind of always she was really thin, very focused on doing her job and diligence, but just a sickly young lady. Now, she passes away actually on March 30th of 1894, and she is only 32 years old, and she does pass away by typhoid fever. And again, she's just been sick, and she had been sick for a long time at this point. Because of her extreme dedication, this was 1894, she has this extreme dedication to the campus, and the campus is mourning her death big time. And in fact, an R.H. Ellis writes that her whole life had been such as to reflect the dignity and honor of the university. And there was a plaque immediately in her honor, kind of, they hung it at Old Main, but immediately they knew that they were going to build this women's dorm by the time that Ella passed away. And so they would eventually move her plaque into the dorm itself whenever the dorm was ready. So the girls move into this dorm. This again had 44 rooms. It's the women's dorm. All kinds of girls are living there. They work there. They have tons of activities there in the newspapers. There was always something going on at Carnall Hall, okay? Always. Whether it be a party, a tea, breakfast, a dinner, they were always hosting different events. Well, just to kind of give you guys some heartache, especially if you actually have looked at the price of college lately and what room and board costs now, it is outrageous, especially at a D1 school like the U.ofA is. But in 1917, the price of boarding was $17. And I don't know if this was by semester or yearly, but $17, guys. Let that sink in. And this was in 1917. I know that's been over 100 years, but it is most definitely nothing. I think you could buy maybe a meal for $17 on campus now. But yeah, the girls utilize Carnall Hall as their dormitory until 1967. Now, after this, there are all kinds of dorms that have been built all around the campus. The campus, by 1967, the campus has grown. There's tons of housing, and the building, it doesn't need to be used or utilized as a dormitory anymore. And you have maintenance and upkeep. And over this whole time, there have been tons of renovations. They had removed the porches from the original conception of Carnall Hall, but it was just a beautiful brick building. And there weren't a lot of changes to the building other than maintenance and upkeep. Okay. Now, in 1967, or a few years after, the building is actually turned into a fraternity home, and it is the Phi Gamma Delta's fraternity, and it remains the fraternity for about 10 years or so. The building after that is utilized as just meeting spots, class, like whatever else the college needs, and especially when Old Main. So again, during the 1980s, we know that Old Main went through that huge renovation, that $10 million renovation. Well, they really utilized Carnall Hall during that time. And around 1991, nobody was using Carnall Hall, and Carnall Hall was in just a state of repair. Okay. At this time, it is almost 100 years old, and it is really in bad shape. The building is left just empty. And the building had actually been put on the National Registry in 1982. So it was a historic building. So it was very important. But in the 90s, it is just pretty much just the university has it. And the university doesn't even know what to do with it. In fact, because it's falling apart, they put like a chain link fence around it to keep people out of it. Blessedly, through a lot of preservationists and supporters of the community and college, like they do come forward instead of tearing down Carnall Hall, which was the thought that they thought they were going to do, they decide to renew it. So in 2003, they spend $7 million to totally renovate the building, and they open it back up as the Inn of Carnall Hall and Ella's restaurant. And I will say, so that was in '03. I just stayed there in June. I mean, it is absolutely beautiful. It looks historic yet modern. I will say that. It's very clean, very well kept. It is absolutely delightful. They have all kinds of historic information, especially about Ella in the hotel. It does have an elevator. So if you need an elevator, it does have an elevator. And it said that there are about 50 hotel rooms. And it's just delightfully historic place to stay if you are on campus or if you're traveling to campus or coming in. Like it is a beautiful place to stay. I would definitely stay there again. It's beautiful. The haunted stories are very interesting. So remember in the 1990s, we talked about how the building is totally vacant. It literally, they put up a chain link fence around it to just keep people out of it. Well, at the time, they do send in, like, a student photographer goes in and just is documenting the building as it is. So she's going around and she's going like inside, outside, taking pictures. Now, when she is on like the first floor of the building taking pictures, she hears footsteps, distinctive footsteps, like coming from above. And she doesn't think much about it. She just figures someone else is in the building, kind of walking around just like she is. I mean, it wasn't just blocked out. I mean, they didn't want people just going in and messing with the building, but she just figured someone else is in the building. Well, after probably about an hour, and she's gone all throughout the place, she realizes nobody is in the building. Like, she was utterly alone, and it was impossible for those footsteps to be a person. Now, she does get to the outside of the building and she takes 3 different pictures of the front door of the building. And I will try to post this picture and see what you see, but in one of the pictures, it is very clear to me, or it appears to me, that there is a person standing in the front door of the building. Like, it looks like an outline of a person, and it doesn't just look like a reflection. It's not like a reflection of her taking the picture, but it's very clearly like a human figure, okay, in this picture. People that have stayed in the hotel over the last 20 years, they have stated that they see indentations on their beds, like someone just sat down beside them. And they do experiencing flickering lights and actual lights being turned off and on. They do experience many poltergeist events, like objects moving on their own. And then they do experience finding ghostly figures in the pictures, just like this young woman did when she took a picture of the front door. So people are seeing outlines, figures, and so on. The most alarming story, I can say, in the early 2000s, when they were working on the big renovation of the building, it said that there were 2 building engineers that were down in the basement inspecting and working on the building. And when they came out of the room that they were in like a mechanical room or whatever in the basement, they step into a hall, and and there's 2 of them, they both see gown, like a figure, like a woman in a ball gown, but the woman has no head and no feet. And this figure came from a wall, so just materialized out of a wall, but then goes into a wall. And they were in a hallway, like, allegedly watching this happen. This is what they state happens. Now, others have also seen this floating figure of a woman in a ball gown, and again, no head. They don't mention the feet thing again, but absolutely no head is mentioned. When I stayed at Carnall Hall, I did not experience anything strange. Like, I didn't see this headless, footless figure or anything like that. I will say they do have, like, everything's historic. There are portraits on the walls. There were some, I'll try to post this, but there was one portrait on the wall. It was super creepy. And it just like every time I looked at it, it felt like it was one of those pictures that it felt like they were staring at you, like if it was a Scooby-Doo episode, like the holes were cut out. It was a little creepy feeling. Yeah. So, but I didn't have anything happen. It's just a beautiful place to sleep. We stayed one night and our room was just very nice. The bathrooms, I do really like a bathroom, especially like in an older hotel, to be nice. And it was like a modern bathroom, but they stuck to kind of that it felt 1920s-ish, 1930s-ish. It was very nice, very pretty, all the things. Oh, and it had this cute little like mini fridge in the room, but it looked like an old-timey fridge. It was so cute. Anywho, stay there. I did Whenever I do stay somewhere where they do have this strange stories, I really like to talk to the staff, of course, because they spend the most time in it. Now, I did speak to like the front desk and then a lady that worked in the bar area, and neither woman, they kind of laughed about the quote unquote haunting, but they did both. I don't remember if it was both or maybe the lady in like the bar area, but she just mentioned that other people that work at Carnall Hall had experienced creepy feelings, or feelings like just unexplained things happening, and just a really creepy experience, especially at night in the hotel. Food for thought. I don't know. Bottom line, it's absolutely beautiful. Go check it out yourself. It's a must see. We're going to go on to talk about another old and historic building on campus, but that has allegedly had some interesting moments, which I'll get into, but some paranormal as well. We're going to talk about the Chi Omega House. And this is really interesting. I'm going to share a little bit of background on the Chi Omega period, but the Chi Omega, it was called a Chi Omega fraternity for women back in the day. Of course, we consider it sorority now. The Chi Omega, they were actually formed, like the whole sorority was formed at the University of Arkansas. And it would have been before it was the University of Arkansas, which we'll talk about, but it was formed in 1895. In fact, the University of Arkansas, the name came about in 1899. Okay. Just FYI there. The Chi Omega sorority for women, they were the first Greek house to purchase property for their future home. So they actually purchased property in 1928, and they are located right on Maple, right across. I mean, they're right there on campus, in the heart of campus, very close to Carnall Hall, but very close to Old Main and such. So they're just in the heart of campus, and it's a beautiful place. So they acquire this property in 1928, and then they do build a home. Now there's different reports. Some reports say that this home was built in 1927. Some say that the lot itself was purchased in 1928, and then the tax records show that the home was actually built in 1935. I would say it's probably closer to the 1928 or so on. It may not have been lived in or finished until 29 or such. At the time that they built this Chi Omega home, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. You can see it as it was now, and like the front part that faces Maple or whatever, it is in the Greek revival style. So it is in that style. Think Graceland. It has the columns, it has the pediment. It's just a very stately home. And at the time, they built like a 10,000 square foot home for these girls. I mean, they were a huge chapter. Like I said, they were formed in 1895, and I think by the time they built this house, they had like they had 88 chapters across the United States. It's just amazing that this all came from the actual University of Arkansas. Of course, they move in, the girls are living in the home, they are conducting their meetings, their philanthropy. I never was in a sorority myself, but it is very interesting to look at the history of these groups. And it's a huge sisterhood of women. And it was just very important for the community, for the school. They did a lot of good for the school, of course, and a lot of good for the community, and just created these lifelong friendships, relationships. Really cool. They're living in this house. There is an interesting, I couldn't find any type of tragedy or anything like that within the house, but in 1952, there was kind of an interesting thing. And I'll premise this, you hear of these things like, I don't even know if I've seen, what is it? Animal House. I don't think I've even sat down and like watched all of that movie. In 1952, this is literally the headline, and this is in the newspaper Northwest Arkansas Times. And quote unquote, it states, houses entered in panty raid staged by students. Prosecution warning issued. Panty raid. I hate that word, by the way. Panty. That is horrible. So basically, what happened was like 1,000 male students went around to all like the sorority houses, probably the women's dormitories, and they basically charged in. Like some of them, I don't think they actually went inside, but they marched onto their grounds of the Chi Omega house, and there were thousands of these boys, I'll say boys, and they were demanding that the girls give them panties. Yes. And they're going about doing this, and the dean, all of the faculty men, the dean, they get even police officers involved to like meet these boys and shut this down. And then they're threatening to arrest and prosecute them. I mean, they were like, so evidently this was like a pandemic at this time. Like, this obviously wasn't the first time that this was happening. And the dean and the president of the college, like, they're just done. They're like, they're over this situation. And so, yes, the only interesting thing, and not even a tragedy, obviously, just a funny little tidbit, was a panty raid in 1952. Ugh. There are different reports that have come forward. And of course, the Chi Omega house is an old structure. Now, the original structure, is late 20s. They did a huge, they did an addition in like the 1930s, like 1935, and then they did another large addition in 1941. Well, in 2016, of course, these additions would have been very old. I did see some different items about the sorority houses. They're aged and they weren't up to code, fire codes and different codes. And of course, you have, young women living in these homes, and more or less they're like a dorm. They have sleeping quarters, kitchen quarters. And so in 2016, the Chi Omega home went through a huge renovation. And so they went in and kind of brought things kind of to the historic look or whatever, the integrity of the original house, but they kind of took down those renovations that were added in like the 30s and 40s and such, and they brought everything, they made a new huge beautiful addition. And of course, everything's going to be brought up to fire codes, safety codes, basically, is the thing. And you can actually go see these, how it's right on Maple. It's very close to Carnall Hall. It's just it's an absolutely beautiful and historic house because of its age, I'm sure. And of course, the fact that there have been numerous women and ladies living in the homes throughout the years. There have been reports. So one report is of ghostly apparitions being seen within the home. And there's not like a list of what the ghostly apparition looks like, but it's basically like floating figures, the typical kind of women in white kind of suggestions. But these are the stories that are coming forward. There's also unexplained noises happening within the house, whether it be footsteps, whispers, that kind of thing. Those kind of ghostly stories are what people are reporting about the Chi Omega house. I did, of course, reach out to see if anyone had, their own experiences or could state what they had heard as far as different experiences on campus. And I will say there was also experiences about the quote unquote old library. There is a beautiful library right on campus, the Mullins Library. It's absolutely beautiful. I've been through it before. It is huge, by the way. And I would definitely think that if you're there late at night, the building is beautiful and new, but there are a lot of old books in the building, of course, and a lot of old artifacts in the building itself. And I would definitely say, like, anytime you're alone in the dark, in a library, there's just some creepy situations there. So there have been some creepy tales of the library, old and new. I did get some feedback. These people have stayed anonymous. One person reached out and stated that when she was a Girl Scout, they had their meetings at what was called the Carlson Terrace area. These are now demolished. She stated that she remembered overhearing one of the adults, at this meeting, that mentioned that they had seen an apparition of a Native American chief walking through that area often. This person said that definitely wouldn't be a surprise. This area was part of the Trail of Tears in that Boston Mountain region into Oklahoma, definitely. And of course, we know that before the European settlers, there were many indigenous peoples here in Arkansas, this whole area, which this is meeting Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri. These buildings were old. Like at this time, definitely, like she mentioned, this was around 2003 or 2004 that she would have been going to these meetings. And yes, I'll get into this Carlson Terrace, but these buildings were very old and creepy and gave off a really creepy feeling, she said, whenever she was there. And she was a kid too, so definitely. Well, I did look up to see if I could find anything about the Carlson Terrace. And so basically this was like an apartment complex, but it was right there on campus. It's part of I would say, the extended campus. If you're familiar with campus, it's very close to where the Adohi dorm is now. But, and we'll kind of get into what it is now, but these Carlson Terrace apartments were for married couples to live in. Okay. I was looking for like any tragic accidents or anything that I could find there. And actually, so she said that she was there in 2003, 2004. Like literally, there were tons of just unhappiness going on in the apartments at that time because they were so old that people were complaining. The people that lived there were complaining about sanitation, sewer problems, safety problems because the apartment building just wasn't like locked down properly. Like you had to have a key to enter the apartment, but there was like windows and doors that were located with like the laundry department of the apartment complex, and those were easily accessible, and that there had been break-ins and burglaries. And so a lot of people in this time frame in the early 2000s were just, they were like, it's a great place to live and obviously good housing for us married couples or whatever, but it's not up to par. Like it's just old. And so I will say during that time period, there was a fire. Nobody was actually killed in the fire, but there was a 5-year-old boy that was hurt. He was injured in the fire, but luckily the firemen got him out of the building before he, succumbed to any like smoke inhalation or anything. So that was all happening in this time frame that this woman reached out to me about. Nowadays, it looked like right after she would have been going to these meetings there. In 2007, the university made the decision to demolish the Carlson Terrace. Now, the actual road that these are on is Carlson, and basically they built the softball field, the softball complex, the stadium over this. And part of the apartment complex were actually used as some of the buildings of the new complex. And so that is where those apartments were located. And now it is the softball complex. And it looks like it is called Bogle Park, but it's right there on Carlson Street Road or whatever. Like I said, it's right beside Adohi, which is the newest dormitory on campus. It's very interesting. So at the time, they were just very old, very creepy. And it's just amazing how, like, that does happen with very old and very creepy buildings. Just all of the haunted stories have come from Old Main, Carnall Hall, the Chi Omega House, and then that Carlson Terrace area. I did have another interesting story. So someone had actually reached out to me about the Chi Omega House. This anonymous source mentions a spooky tales of the Chi Omega House. So she states, located at 940 West Maple Street, various things have happened through the years. There's chandeliers flickering, and then one time it is said that the AC unit went out when a founder's descendant was cut from Rush. So this is evidently a story that has happened over the years. Now, this founder, I'm not going to mention which one, but it was a founder that does have a dormitory named after them. Just a very interesting story. But chandeliers flickering, lights flickering, just more spooky tales from the Chi Omega house. I did get a comment left, and I could not find verification of this, but remember, we did find verification of this other. Now, it stated that someone's head was chopped off by or in one of the Reynolds Razorback Stadium elevators. It was some type of accident. Now, this person worked for the catering company for the skyboxes, and so it said that the maintenance guys were telling this story. This person stated that this was sometime before 2006. And remember, you did have that horrible incident of those contractors being electrocuted. And so I just wonder, I couldn't find anything about this elevator incident or accident, but, definitely could this have been related? Very interesting. Food for thought on that. Definitely interesting, or maybe just a situation that happened that they didn't cover. There wasn't any covering. Now, another person that worked for an actual painting company that did work for the Walker Hall. Now, they said during a renovation decades ago that area was just very creepy. Like it was an older building and just very creepy whenever his company was working in the building. So definitely some very creepy happenings going on campus. Now, I did look deeply into any elevator deaths, and I did actually find one that did not pop up in an earlier search, but it appears that a young man, he was actually like a student at the Fayetteville High School. And this is back in 1975, so definitely not 2006. But in 1975, he is actually in the old main building, and he gets on the elevator and he gets trapped and he gets killed. So he is only 16 years old, and he gets crushed between the elevator counterweight and then the wall of the elevator in the shaft. And this was just a horrific incident. They rush him to the hospital, but he is pronounced dead by the time he gets there. And this is just absolutely terrible. But he was visiting an older kid that he knew, and that's why he was there. He was actually a sophomore at the Fayetteville High School. Absolutely horrendous. So that is another actual tragedy for Old Main, and maybe a potential reason for these so-called haunted experiences. What do you think? I don't know, but that was definitely a horrific tragedy for the campus when that happened, and really for the community, of course. I can't even imagine his poor parents, but yes, so, so sad. So, definitely another kind of check mark for tragedy in the old main building. So, if you get the opportunity to visit the University of Arkansas, definitely check out the beauty, but maybe go around the campus and take some pictures of Old Main, of the area around Adohi, the Chi Omega House, and maybe stay at the inn at Carnall Hall. And maybe you will have your own fabulous experience on one of the most beautiful college campuses in the country. But thank you guys so much for being with me this week in this episode. I hope you liked it. I have a lot of episodes planned. Abe Pipkin's case is coming, the part 2, and then lots of other content that I know that you guys will be excited for. Continue to listen, continue to reach out, comment, like, all the things I appreciate. Bye.